So, all right, we're going to finish up Jacob's ladder here. So Genesis 28, 12 through 17, somewhere around there. So Jacob is sleeping at Bethel. He has a stone for a pillow, and the Lord appears to him in a dream. He has this vision of a ladder descending down to earth. Above the ladder is the Lord, and angels are ascending and descending on it. And we have this idea of mediation, how that God condescends to man, how that in Christ, really, God has come down. As Christ says in John, that he is that ladder. He is the Son of Man on whom you will see the angels ascending and descending. So that's Jacob's ladder. And moving along here, after that, we want to note here that Jacob, in this encounter with God, he was arguably the more wicked than his brother Esau. Not less, but certainly he wasn't winning any contests for righteousness. And God appears to him and says that it's through you I will continue this unilateral covenant that I've started with Abraham. But I want us to notice the response of Jacob, starting in verse 20. He says, and Jacob vowed a vow, saying, if God be with me and will keep me in the way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and raiment to put on, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then shall the Lord be my God. And I think we see 2 points in this. The first point is that Jacob's faith was very imperfect. It was very immature. It was wobbly. It bordered on being transactional. But I want to argue that it was still faith. Because we see with this vow, he sets up this pillar with these stones and he anoints it with oil. This was an act of faithful devotion. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't what it would come to be, but it was faith. He meant what he was doing for the glory of God. Now, as we think about this, I don't want to be misheard here. Jacob's worship, Jacob's faith did not cause God's grace. That's what we were just speaking of. Did not cause God's grace, but it was the instrument of his salvation and of God working in his life. Hebrews 11:6 says, but without faith it is impossible to please him. For he that cometh to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of them that diligently seek him. So nothing that we do, no work that we perform causes our salvation. God causes our salvation. We simply have faith, are thereby justified before God.
Just a quick observation, because I agree with you. I just want to parse that out, because you know what we're going to talk about. So when you say nothing we do causes our salvation, right? So that means our faith then would be caused by God. Has to.
Yep. By grace you're saved through faith, not of yourselves, it is a gift of God. So, in other words, without Jacob's faith, look at Hebrews there, like we just read, without Jacob's faith, it's not possible that Jacob could please God. Jacob pleases God through his faith. That's what Hebrews tells us. Just like Abraham believed God, it was counted to him for righteousness. Jacob had to do the same. And I think that this setting up of the pillar that we spoke of, his anointing of it, and his vow is evidence of that faith. Now his faith will become greater. It'll eventually he'll wrestle with the angel, wrestle with God, and have a much more mature faith. I also want us to see next here that this is a direct revelation. It's a personal encounter with God. That's why he's so afraid. He'd heard, we assume for years, about the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and now he experiences for himself that living God. And I think we can find a good point of application here for us, and that's the godly upbringing is vital. The Bible says to train up your children in the way that they should go, and when they are older, they shall not depart from it. But we can't expect simply to passively inherit our parents' faith, right? Our godly heritage, our godly inheritance must become personal. That's what Paul told Timothy, remember, or observed about Timothy. He said, 2 Timothy 1:5, when I call to remembrance the unfeigned faith, the genuine faith that is in thee, which dwelt first in thy grandmother Lois and thy mother Eunice, and I am persuaded that it's in thee also. So what he's saying there is I saw faith in your mother, I saw faith in your grandmother, and now I see it in you. But Timothy had genuine faith. It wasn't simply an inherited faith. That he had to actively trust God, believe in God, worship God. So let me encourage us, those that have young children, even those that don't have young children, to be a faithful witness to God, for your children, so that they can see your good works, glorify your Father in heaven, and be moved by the conviction of the Spirit to make your faith their faith. Well, I want to continue our study. Now, moving past that, we've been thinking through the patriarchs here, as we said. That's sort of finishing up last week. So we've been thinking through the patriarchs and how that the patriarchs are integral to the formation of Israel, to the nation of Israel, through which will come the Messianic hope, will come Christ. And last time, as we said, we looked at God's gracious work in Jacob's life. We looked at how the elder Esau was made to serve the younger. How that his placement ran contrary to custom and to fairness, but was in accord with God's purposes. Not only to elevate Jacob, but to judge Esau for his disregarding of his birthright. And of course, we looked at Jacob's encounter with God at Bethel, as we've already discussed. We saw that how he recognized God's immanence. He said, surely God is in this place. But he sort of missed God's transcendence. He doesn't quite realize that God is in every place. As he says, if you're with me, I'll make you my God when I return back. Not realizing that God will always be with him. It's the nature of God. God is transcendent. So he strikes a bargain with God. That's all they can really call it. It was a bargain. And he says, if you will be with me, you will be my God when I return. I think we see this same flawed conception of faith today. People believing that their faith, the outworking of their salvation, is a business arrangement with them and God. That it's some kind of bilateral agreement to live holy if Christ saves them from hell. Rather than recognizing it as a unilateral mercy that's shown to them, a Spirit-produced conviction and recognition of their sin, recognition of their inability, and need for Christ, need for their dependence on him, need to look to Jesus as the author, the finisher of our faith. But we come now here to Genesis 29. Genesis 29. I think we can really divide this into three sections. I'm not going to read the text yet. We'll read some text later, but I just want to sort of hit up some high notes. We can really divide this section into three sections. We can think about Jacob's encounter with some folks here that we're going to read about. We can think about his father-in-law, Laban, his business arrangement with him, and the deception of his father-in-law. And we'll get into all this. We'll explain all that here in a moment. Our subject, I guess you could say, is Jacob's growing maturity, or rather his lack of maturity at this point, his prayerlessness, his striving with Laban, his father-in-law, this brother of Rebekah. Remember Rebekah? Rebekah is the wife of Isaac, his father. And we see Laban is a conniver. Laban kind of matches Jacob in his level of deceit, his level of trickery. And we'll see, here that Jacob really does meet his match, that Laban becomes kind of a mirror for Jacob's own deceit and sin. God used Laban to hold that up to Jacob, to show what he is, rather what he's not. At this point, I suppose you could say. But first here we see this encountering. We see 3 encounters. Jacob meets the shepherds, he meets Rachel, he meets Laban. And we read first at the start of our chapter that Jacob comes into the land of the people of the east. That's the land of Rebekah and her grandfather Abraham. This is kind of, or his grandfather Abraham rather. This is kind of the area of northern Syria. It's the Fertile Crescent. In other words, Jacob has come back to Haran. Remember how Abraham lived in Haran. And remember, Rachel, his mom, had sent Isaac away or not Isaac, but had sent Jacob away because Esau was comforting himself on the thought that he would kill Jacob after the passing of Isaac. Because remember, Jacob still is the blessing, still is the birthright of Esau. So she tells him to go back to Haran, go back to Laban, her brother, and tarry with him a few days. That's chapter 27, verse 44, that she tells him that. So Jacob comes upon this well in the field in verse 2 of chapter 29. And there were 3 flocks of sheep here that we read. Importantly, we're told this well is a stone rolled over. Now, this well wouldn't have been like our typical conception of a well like you might see in a book or something. It's not a raised thing with a roof over it, a bucket and all that. It was a much simpler affair. It would have been a great stone rolled over kind of a hole in the ground, basically, a spring of water. And this stone's purpose was to kind of keep the water pure, keep it free from dust, and it was also to sort of protect it, to guard its use. So that not just any passerby was allowed to use it. And it would have been in the possession of these shepherds and their flocks. I don't know if you remember, but the Philistines had blocked the wells of Abraham, we read earlier. And Isaac had cleared them off, and he dug them back up. When Isaac's herdsmen and the herdsmen of Gerar contended over one well there, they said this water is our water. They fought for possession over it. Well, it's the same idea here. It's this well with this great stone, and it's an arid region, so it's necessary that this stone be rolled over it. And Jacob sees these shepherds with their flocks, and he asks, where he's at. He didn't have a GPS like we have now. He knew he was generally going in the right direction, but there weren't maps back then like we have. And they said, we're of Haran. So Jacob knows he's arrived at his destination. He knows he knows he's at where he needs to be. And what's more, we discover here that Rachel, the daughter of Laban, is coming with the sheep. So I want us to see here, this was the right place. It was the right girl, the right woman. And it's illustrative of God's sovereign control over Jacob's life. God always has a plan. He always has a purpose. Even in what seems like happenstance or happy coincidence, he has a purpose. And we have all this leading up, this conflict between the brothers, this deception of Jacob, all leading him to this place that he's at now, but it's all by God's design. But notice here what we don't see. We don't see Jacob acknowledge God's great use of this providence to extend him yet more grace in his life. We see it as readers, but he doesn't see the purposes and the working of the Lord, or at least it doesn't seem like he cares to verbalize it. I wouldn't have any indication that he was thankful to God for his circumstances, particularly. And I think we can remember the servant of Abraham. when he was sent to get Rebekah. He's sent back by Abraham. He's married and made to swear to go find a wife for Isaac. And he comes upon a well, but he prays. So we have this contrast between Abraham's servant and Jacob here. Abraham's servant is a much godlier man, it seems, than Jacob is right now. Because he prays, he asks for guidance. He asks for confirmation and blessing in his mission. And he says, remember, he says, let the first woman who lets down her bucket, let her give me water and my camels also. And let that be the one. Let that be who is for my servant, my master Isaac. And so it was, we read. So you see this really striking contrast of the prayerfulness of the servant a few chapters back versus the prayerlessness of Jacob. And it really highlights, I think, Jacob's spiritual immaturity. It really highlights his carnality. Because it doesn't even seem to occur to him to thank God. Let's look at verses 7 through 10. Here is this interaction, this first encounter with these shepherds. Starting verse 7, and he said, lo, it is high day. Neither is it time that the cattle should be gathered together. Water ye the sheep, and go and feed them. And they said, we cannot until all the flock be gathered together, until they roll the stone from the well's mouth. Then we water the sheep. And while he yet spake with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she kept them. And it came to pass when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, that Jacob went near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flocks of Laban, his mother's brother. So what is happening here is these shepherds are waiting until everybody is gathered, because rolling away this stone was massive. It took more than one person typically to lift this stone lid, to roll it away. It couldn't be done by one person. But Jacob sees Rachel coming, and he tries to shoo away the shepherds, it seems. He says, water ye the sheep. But they say, we can't till the stone's rolled away. So Jacob sees Rachel coming, and it seems to demonstrate his strength, maybe he's just impatient. Maybe he just wants rid of the shepherds. He moves the stone away by himself. As he rolls this stone away so her flock can be watered. And this would be a kind of a Herculean task. So I think what I get from this is right from the jump, we see that Jacob's courtship is kind of marked by self-will. It's marked by effort. I think he has in his mind he's going to win Rachel. And then, of course, next we encounter Laban. This is Rachel's father. It's Rebekah's brother. This is the second time that we read about Laban. We encountered him first in Genesis 24, 29 through 31. There we read Abraham and Rebekah had a brother, and his name was Laban, and Laban ran out unto the man, that's that servant of Abraham, unto the well. So again, we have this meeting at this well, just like in our current text. And it came to pass when he saw the earring and the bracelets upon his sister's hands, when he heard the words of Rebekah, his sister, because they back up, Isaac's servant had adorned Rebekah with these gifts, these bracelets, earrings, all this gold. So when he heard the words of Rebekah, his sister, saying, thus spake the man unto me, this man sent from Abraham, and he came unto the man, and behold, he stood by the camels at the well, and he said, come in, thou blessed of the Lord, wherefore standest thou without? Why do you stand outside? For I have prepared the house and room for the camels. So Laban probably has this in mind when he meets Jacob. This is our second encounter with him. Second encounter at a well. Laban knows Jacob, undoubtedly knows Jacob came from a rich family. And it must be on his mind that association with Jacob will do him well. I think that's almost certainly on his mind. And so Jacob, we read, lives with Laban for a month at first. And I think it must be that Jacob was already working during that month for Laban, because Laban says, thou art my brother, or thou art my kinsman. we would say, shouldest thou serve me for nothing? He says, tell me what your wages will be. In other words, we're family. But that doesn't mean you should work for free. Name your price, name your wage. And he probably already knows that Jacob's interested in Rachel, and Rebecca, sorry. He's probably interested in keeping his free labor on the hook, his sort of wealthy labor, free labor on the hook. But Laban has these two daughters. He has Leah, this is the oldest, and he has Rachel, the youngest. And Jacob isn't interested in Leah. The Bible says that she has tender eyes or weak eyes, depending on your translation. There's various debates about what this means. Perhaps it means that she was nearsighted. Perhaps that she had dull eyes. Maybe she was simply plain looking. Certainly the idea that you get, that maybe Leah was just a little bit homely. So he's not interested in her. Jacob isn't interested in her. But he arranges to work 7 years in sort of an indentured servitude for Rachel. This is going to be his dowry for Rachel, this youngest daughter of Laban. So again, we see here God's providence. We see how, like with Abraham's servant, we find Jacob brought to a well, meeting this woman, meeting his future wife. We see this continuation of the covenant. But as we said, when Jacob encounters the good providence of God, he offers no praise, he offers no prayer, he offers no petition. He just rushes headlong into lifting this stone. And I think that's an issue, because I think we can see here that when we go without God's guidance, we can fall into trouble. The providences can become disciplinary in nature, right? They can become a way of punishing us and correcting our behavior. I think this is what we see with Jacob, as we're going to see with his dealings with Laban. Perhaps if Jacob had been more prayerful, he could have avoided some of these issues that he had. Could have avoided some of these consequences that he's going to run into. So Jacob serves these 7 years, because he says, if I'll work for her 7 years, I'll work for free if you give me Rebecca. And it says, the Bible says they seemed to him to be but a few days. You know, we spoke last week about the light affliction that works a more exceeding weight of glory. And I think here we find a similar idea. The prize of his wife to be Rebecca, or Rachel is. The prize of Rachel is such that it makes what he endures as a small thing to him. And I think we can kind of see in a sort of type of Christ in this. You know, Christ labored for his bride. He labored for us, the church. The Bible says in Hebrews 12 again, who for the joy set before him, for the joy that was set before him, endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. So, I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say there is a sort of a bit of typology there. So Laban, Jacob serves the 7 years, and Laban throws this wedding feast, and it would have been a several-day affair. It would have been a time of celebration. Many commentators say that it would have probably been a time of wine. That might explain some of what's getting ready to come up. Then there's the consummation of the marriage. And this would have been at night, the Bible tells us. It would have been under the cover of darkness. We know culturally the bride would have been veiled with a thick veil. And what we find is that Laban has given Leah. He's not given Rachel. But Jacob doesn't perceive it. Jacob doesn't realize it. And as we say, it's understandable that Jacob doesn't perceive it and that he doesn't realize it because of it being night, because of the veil, maybe even because he was drinking. We don't know. It's possible. And he's been matched sort of deceit for deceit, and he's indignant. You know, he sort of is on his dignity. He's upset. He has a sort of a self-righteousness about him. Now he's bothered by deception. Now he complains about it. He didn't with Esau when he was the perpetrator, but now he finds it to be an issue. And Laban sort of replies to him, throws up to him, well, it's not the custom of this country to do such, to give the younger before the older. And I think it's kind of interesting because this is what Jacob had done. He had previously upset the custom. He had previously upset the culture himself through trickery. Now it was God's desire, it was God's purposes, but there was some deception involved there. And now it gets turned back on him. So as he deceived his dim-sighted, his father who was failing in his eyesight and pretended to be his brother, now he too, we could say, is sort of blinded by the cover of darkness and all these things as Leah pretends to be Rachel.
And they're both issues over trying to do an inbred on the whole firstborn thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we should be reminded here, what came to my mind is if we regard iniquity in our heart, if we have sin in our lives, if we pursue things in an ungodly fashion, God will refine us through the furnace of affliction. He will always reveal sin. He will recompense evil for evil. Galatians 6:7 says, be not deceived, God does not mock. For whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. For he that soweth to his flesh shall of the flesh reap corruption, but he that soweth to the Spirit shall of the Spirit reap life everlasting. Jacob is the picture of a carnal, immature believer, and he has sort of sown to the wind and is now reaping the whirlwind, we could say. So Jacob is forced to fulfill the week, another week, yet another 7 years. He says week, this is a way of talking about years, each day being symbolic of a year. So a week that he needs to fulfill is actually 7 days. There's a bird in the building.
Uh-oh.
Oh,
Excuse me, sorry.
Well, we can figure that out later, I guess.
Interesting.
Yeah, you stopped.
So in other words, Jacob is involved in this polygamy situation here. He now has 2 wives. You know, and we find, rightfully so, we find polygamy, marrying of 2 sisters, we find that objectionable. We find that abhorrent, and we should. In fact, God does. We can look at Leviticus 18:18, and it says not to take the sister of your wife to wed. And then when we think about polygamy itself, Christ, he isn't talking about polygamy, but Christ points to the monogamous relationship of Adam and Eve in the New Testament. Remember when they came to him trying to defend divorce, and Jesus took them to the text, and he went before Moses. He went all the way back to the garden. He says in Matthew 19:4, he says, "Have you not read that he which made them at the beginning made them male and female, and said, for this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh. Therefore they are no more twain, but one flesh. What therefore God hath joined together, let no man put asunder." You know, it's interesting. You see about everyone, even non-believers today, are quick to see the folly and the sin of polygamy. It's kind of ironically stated, like we're willing to accept all other kinds of marriage, but we still at least agree that that one is wrong. But many wives at once. But those same people will look right past many wives one at a time. Right? Like they know marrying a bunch of wives all at once is wrong, but they're okay with marrying one. the portion of that one, marry another portion of that one, so on and so forth. And that's foolishness, it's folly. That's kind of like saying, mass murder is wrong, but serial killing is acceptable behavior.
Yeah.
Because it's one at a time. Of course, it's not. Jacob will have a lot of trouble from all this. They'll have a lot of good too. We'll have a lot of good from it. Chapter 31, verse 29. Chapter 31, verse 29. I'm sorry, goodness. If you want to jump to that. It says, and when the Lord saw that Leah was hated because Jacob did not appreciate Leah, did not want Leah. When the Lord saw that Leah was hated, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. And I think here we really see God displaying his penchant to confound the world of the wise. He spoke about this last week, or the week before last. It was Jacob's plan to marry Rachel. And when he got stuck with Leah, she was despised to him. He didn't care for her, or he didn't care to embrace her in a sense of a loving sense. Yet God decides it's to this unfavored woman that he will now show mercy by opening her womb. I know we mentioned this last week, but it's really a recurrent theme, how that God sort of confounds the purposes of human beings. It was never Jacob's desire to wed Leah, but he does, and God opens her womb, and we'll see that from her womb comes Levi and comes Judah, comes the messianic, comes the line. Bird just keeps distracting me. Comes the priestly line and the messianic line. I'm reminded here of 1 Corinthians 1, 27 through 29. But God hath chosen the foolish things of the world to confound the wise, and God hath chosen the weak things of the world to confound the things which are mighty, and base things of the world, and things which are despised hath God chosen. Yea, and things which are not bring to naught things that are, that no flesh should glory in his presence. So God here is using the quote-unquote wrong bride to bring about 4 of the tribes of Israel. It's God who must open her womb. To him goes all the glory, of course. And so God shows mercy. She gives birth to 4 sons here in this section. She gives birth to Reuben, to Simeon, to Levi, and to Judah. And as we said, of course, the last 2 will be very incredibly important to the Old Testament history, and so also important to the New Testament. From Levi comes Moses and the priesthood of Aaron. From Judah comes King David, the branch of Jesse, the Messiah. Jesus of Nazareth here.
Is the bird not want to go out?
He's getting there.
He's just confused.
It's like, wait, where am I?
I'm lost.
It's interesting to consider that the salvation of the world is so often brought about, so often turns upon evil acts, right? It was evil, the trickery that Laban employed, this deceit of Laban. And of course, God is not the author of evil, but he does use it for his purposes. Remember, Paul says in 1 Corinthians 2, 7 through 9, but we speak the wisdom of God in the mystery, even the hidden wisdom, which God ordained before the world to our glory, which none of the princes of this world knew. For had they known him, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. But as it is written, eye hath not seen nor ear heard, neither has entered into the heart of man the things which God hath prepared for them that love him. And what that small section of text tells us is that God's wisdom, in God's wisdom, he uses the machinations, the plans of these demon-controlled princes. That's what they are. The princes of this world are behind them, has this world system of of principalities and powers, of rulers of darkness. And it was this God-hating world system that pounded the nails into the hands and feet of Jesus. And so Paul says if they had known, they wouldn't have done it. That such preparations, such ideas had never even entered the heart of man, the mind of man. But God uses them to bring about salvation. I remember in Acts 2, Peter is speaking. He says, "Ye men of Israel, hear these words, Jesus of Nazareth, a man approved of God among you by miracles and wonders and signs, which God did by him in the midst of you. And ye yourself also know, him being delivered by the determinate counsel of the foreknowledge of God, ye have taken, and by wicked hands have crucified and slain. And God hath raised up, having loosed the pains of death, because it was not possible that he should be holden of it." So it's by the determined counsel of God we see here that Christ was crucified, but it was accomplished by the hands of wicked men. Well, in the same way, it was by the wickedness that Laban did in marrying Leah off through deceit that God used. God pitied that woman. He saw her barrenness, and he said, I will bring forth from her Messiah. And ultimately, we find this. We ultimately find it is through her lineage that Messiah comes. And then, of course, that's that idea of the seed promise being continued. It started all the way back in Genesis 3:15 with Eve. It was again confirmed through Abraham and his only begotten son Isaac. And now it continues here. She has Judah. Judah's line of descent will produce Boaz. That begets Obed or Ruth. I'm reading here down from Matthew chapter 1. Obed begets Jesse, and Jesse begets David the king, and David the king begets Solomon, and Solomon begets Rehoboam, and on and on and on until we get to Mary, who is espoused to Joseph. And Mary brings forth, by virtue of birth, of course, Jesus. So all of that, we all sit here today saved by God's grace, all because Laban said, I'm going to trick my son-in-law because I like his free labor. It benefits me. Shyster. Yeah, shyster.
And because Jacob tricked Esau.
Yeah. Yeah, we can back it up and say because Jacob tricked Esau. Yeah.
Crazy.
Yep. And then we go to chapter 30. We see that Rachel is barren. She can't give Jacob a son. And this is kind of interesting too, because Leah vies for Jacob's love and doesn't have it, yet she has children. And Rachel has Jacob's love, but doesn't have children. So they each have something the other wants, it seems.
It's such a dichotomy from today's world where people are like, I don't really want kids. But back then, having
everything.
Many kids, yeah, everything.
Yeah. Yeah, she says, in fact, give me children lest I die.
Yeah.
It was, a woman's value was practically nothing if she couldn't provide children for her husband in that culture. It was very, very important. So Genesis 31-4 says that when Rachel saw that she bare Jacob no children, Rachel envied her sister again and said unto Jacob, give me children or else I die. And Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel, and he said, am I in God's stead who withheld from thee the fruit of the womb? And she said, behold, my maid Bilhah, go in unto her, as to say, have intercourse with her, and she shall bear upon my knees, that I may also have children by her. And she gave him Bilhah, her handmaid, to wife, and Jacob went in unto her. So we see here that Jacob envies her sister. And this is very much a turnaround. Rachel envies. It has been Leah that has envied, but now it's on the shoes on the other foot, so to speak. I think there's a good principle here, and that's in your Christian walk. Don't look to others and what they have. Don't envy the person who seems to have it all, or even who does have it all, but rather look to God. Because you know, we see here that Jacob is angry. Isaac had interceded for his wife in prayer, but not Jacob. This is, again, Jacob being carnal. And his theology here is right. It's true, he's not in God's stead. He does recognize God's authority, but his religion, if we can call it that, is very thin. His love for God at this point is quite cold. And his love for his wife, in fact, you could argue, and his heart is not moved to pray for her the way that Isaac's heart was moved to pray for Rebekah. So Rachel here remains barren, and here we are again with this giving of the handmaids, as we were with Hagar. Remember, Hagar is offered to Abraham. When Sarah cannot conceive, from that comes Ishmael. And that was a lot of problems for everybody. And this was kind of a custom. This was something they did. People in that time kind of thought a womb was a womb, whatever. The child was kind of perceived as being in the bowels and the loins of the father, and if the wife's womb was closed, use the language of the Bible, well, another womb was just as good as the wife's. This is how they thought. This was their idea. So this idea they have of bearing on the knees, this phrase bearing on the knees, is sort of an expression for adoption. It was, from what I read, it was like when it came time to deliver the child, the wife would be sort of a midwife figure, and she would, the pregnant woman would be sort of reclining on the knees, in between the knees of the wife as she delivered. It sort of has that idea. And it refers to adoption, whereby the child is born to the handmaid and made the wife's child. We see here that Bilhah conceives, and Rachel calls him Dan. I want to stop here for a moment because it's kind of interesting when we look through the Bible how this plays out. You know, we see Dan here as the product. We can say Dan here is the product, not a prayer, not a seeking of God, but of human thought, of human machinations, of human works, at least in one sense. And when we read the Bible, we see Dan as a tribe will be all about man-made religion. It kind of keeps going in the Bible. In Judges 18, we see that the people of Dan become idolaters. And then later, when the kingdom splits, Jeroboam, the king over the northern kingdom, will make a golden calf to make worship easier in Dan and in Bethel for his kingdom, to keep them from visiting Jerusalem, where the true worship is taking place. And I just think it's very interesting to notice what a wreck Dan will be of the tribe. This first son that's produced by Bilhah. In comparison to Levi and to Judah that came forth from Leah through the work of God opening her womb. So you have here sort of God opening the womb of one woman, and the other woman being barren, and that woman saying, let's do it this way. Let's do it my way. And you sort of have these repercussions throughout the Bible. This tribe of Dan. And the tribe of Dan, aren't they not mentioned in Revelation?
No, they are not.
Yeah.
They are eventually supplanted.
Yeah.
Like Joseph's sons.
Yeah. So that's interesting too. By the time we get to Revelation, they're not to be seen. Well, let's see here. And then we have this continuation of children being born. We have Bilhah again bears Naphtali in verse 6. Then Leah turns to using her handmaid, that's Zilpah. She births Gad, then she births then Asher, and on and on on we go, and Leah bears another child, eventually Issachar, then Zebulun, Rachel, then has Joseph. Then finally, much later, we have Benjamin. Rachel dies in childbirth of him. So these will be the children that produce the 12 tribes of Israel. You'll have 11 whole tribes and then 2 half tribes from Joseph. Be Joseph's children, Ephraim and Manasseh. This is the fount from which the nation of Israel springs. That's why if there's sort of anything that's sort of very important in all that we've read, it's this idea of the 12 tribes, because they came from these 12 children. So we come to the New Testament, we see the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin in the south. This is where it starts. Any questions so far before we go on, or any thoughts or anything?
It seems a little strange that this is common practice. So I can't have children. Take my manservant, and she can have children for me.
Yeah, we saw it with Abraham and Sarah, right? Created issues.
Yeah.
It's a cultural thing, not something God instituted and said this is the way to do it. Of course, we didn't even end up with the commandments and all the various rules and things in Leviticus and so forth until Moses. Moses is not even in the picture yet, so that doesn't come down the pipe until much later. All the other rules about marriage and what God thinks of how things are to operate.
I think that's something interesting too, because when we get to the New Testament, talking about divorce, the Pharisees' argument is that Moses says we can do it. And Jesus says, for the hardness of your heart, it was commanded. In other words, it was not God's design from the beginning. So God, in a certain sense, I don't want to say he works with the culture, but he sort of, it seems as if the witness of Scripture is that he is gradually revealing his will, he is gradually reforming the culture of Israel. I mean, my goodness, they have enough problems as it comes later on anyway. Even when they get law, it's not, they don't do much better even when they know they're not supposed to be doing stuff like that. But yeah, it was not God's design.
We see it throughout the scriptures. We see God's actively, his
Yeah.
decrees and so forth, his commands. Then there's this passive will where he permits
Yeah,
things to happen.
yeah,
But it all works together for his glory, even these things.
yeah, yeah.
Because at this point, they don't know much about Yahweh yet. You know, that they know very little, because he doesn't reveal himself coming up until really the Exodus, when he starts giving the law. To really understand who God is and who his nature is and who he says he is and what makes holy. So at this point, they don't really know much about the attributes, who he is. They just know he's the God of Abraham, of the forefathers of Abraham and Isaac.
Yeah,
So they don't know much about him yet, not until coming up here about 1,000 years later.
yeah, very little.
And the thing that probably happens is their cultural backgrounds with false gods and idols, that gets imprinted on God quite a bit until God disabuses them of those notions. So they probably imprint upon Yahweh things that are experientially what they've experienced, traditions with other gods.
Yeah.
And they make a lot of assumptions that Yahweh is going to operate the same way.
Very much so. You know, that's, so, well, we're not going to read this, but just to quickly go over it, tying into this. Jacob says, he makes a deal with Laban. He's wanting to leave, and he says, give me all your speckled and your spotted cattle. I'll take those. You keep the ones that are pure. Those would be the prized ones. And what happens is all Laban's cattle end up speckled and spotted, or the vast majority of them. So we'll get back to that, but that causes dispute and conflict, and they have to flee, essentially, kind of under the cover of darkness. And Rachel takes the images of Laban. So this is about the idolatry that's sort of present. She takes the household gods that Laban had. So Laban sort of acknowledges Jacob and his God, but he still has these foreign gods, and Rachel drags them along with her to sort of get back at her father. So that's sort of an interesting part about the culture and the sort of flawed nature of these patriarchs and their.
Yeah, it's the
Wow.
Jerry Springer show.
Yeah, it's absolute chaos. One thing that I was wanting to ask, and I don't have an answer to this. So we see here with the speckled and the spotted, we see what Jacob does is he does this weird thing where he takes branches and he peels the bark in stripes, and he sets that in front of Laban's cattle, the sheep, and all those things, and they conceive, they make young in front of those sticks, and somehow that leads to the speckled and spotted. Now, what the question I have is that simply God working through Jacob's understanding? Because this is not how science works, right? This is not how biology works. So, like, how do we sift that? Because I don't have an answer. I never have.
No, I just always took it like he thought he was helping.
Yeah, he thought he was helping.
You know, God was sovereign. He was going to do what he was going to do. So that was probably a facepalm moment for God saying, dude,
Yeah.
I don't know, if you heard this from your mom or the wives' tale or what, but no, that's not gonna, thanks for your help, but no.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. It's a very strange, there's a lot of strange things in the Bible. That's definitely one of them. But yeah, that works. That's a good explanation. So as we said, Jacob leaves. They're on their way back to the promised land, to Canaan. And starting in Genesis 29, I want us to read here not Genesis 29, my goodness, Genesis 32. Starting in verse 9. It says, and Jacob said, O God of my father, Jacob is praying, O God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, Lord which said unto me, return unto thy sanctuary and to thy kindred, and I will deal well with thee. I am not worthy, and the least of all the mercy, all of thy mercies, and of all of thy truth, which thou hast showed unto thy servant. For with my staff I passed over this Jordan, and now I am become two bands. Deliver me, I pray thee, from the hand of my brother and from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest he come and smite me and the mother with the children. And thou saidst, I will surely do thee good, and make thy seed as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. So now we get Jacob praying. And we see Jacob is worried. And like we all do, he calls out to God in his trouble. He didn't consult or thank God when he came to Haran. He didn't pray for his wife that was barren, but now he's praying.
He's on the back edge of his life too.
Yeah,
right?
he's on the back end of his life. He's had this second encounter and all of this. And Watke, the commentator that Kevin introduced me to, said that the runaway must now confront his past, that's Esau, with his family, and his future with God. So he's sort of at this turning point in his life where his faith is getting much more serious, It's getting it's been refined, we could say, much more mature. And he's crying out to God for help.
The futility of fighting God and trying to do things your own way, after a while, it's like, Lord, okay, I'm done. This is
Yeah.
yours.
Yeah,
Finally yield to the Lord, seek Him.
yeah,
I don't know why somebody would do that.
yeah, all right. Let's see.
Yeah.
We're going to move here to verse 24, that same chapter. Read to 31. This encounter, the second encounter with God. Jacob was left alone, and there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of the day. And when he saw that he prevailed not against him, he touched the hollow of his thigh, and the hollow of Jacob's thigh was out of joint. And as he wrestled with him, and he said, Let me go, for the day breaketh. And he said, I will not let thee go, except thou bless me. And he said unto him, What is thy name? And he said, Jacob. And he said, Thy name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel. For as a prince thou hast power with God and with men, and hast prevailed. And Jacob asked him and said, Tell me, I pray thee, thy name. And he said, Therefore, why is it that thou dost ask after my name? And he blessed him there. And Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. And as he passed over Peniel, the sun rose upon him, and he halted upon his thigh. So this is God, and this is Jacob's second spiritual encounter with God. By the banks of the river Jabbok, we read here, as he's going back to Esau, headed in that direction. And he comes out from this encounter, not so much in triumph over God, but rather he simply prevails. His faith, we might say, again, has matured. And I think, even though I do believe in the past, Jacob's encounter at Bethel was an act of devotion. But I do think if there's sort of a singular moment that I had to pin down when Jacob's conversion happened, I think it might be this one. It's at least a reasonable guess. And this man that he wrestled with, it is not a man. We actually see that this man is God.
It's God.
A Christophany.
Yeah, yes. Almost certainly in Christophany, that is an appearance of Christ in the Old Testament. I think it's fair to say that, we talked about the angel of the Lord. This angel of the Lord figure that we discussed a few weeks ago that appears, speaks for God, and is talked to as if he is God. That's because he is not an angel in the sense of a created being, but he is a messenger for God. He is Christ, just like Christ is a messenger for God, for the Father. Way back in Genesis 18, we see the three men approach Abraham, and two go to Sodom. And one remains and has a conversation with Abraham. And if you look at that conversation, he is speaking to God.
Yeah, he takes worship, takes the appellation of Lord
Yeah.
and all that.
Yeah.
A lot of times you read in the Old Testament about an angel of God did this, or an angel, or several, or whatever, but the angel of the Lord is something that we have to verify with context, but usually when it says the angel of the Lord, it could be pre-incarnate Christ, the Christophany.
Yes. So yeah, we have this wrestling with God, and we have this. We sort of the text indicates it, but Hosea 12, 3 and 4 really pins it down. This idea. Hosea 12, 3 and 4, he says, He took his brother by the heel in the womb, that's Jacob, and by his strength he had power with God. Yea, he had power over the angel and prevailed. So we know it's this angel figure. And he prevailed, he wept, made supplication unto him. He found him in Bethel. There he spake with us, even the Lord God of hosts. The Lord is his memorial. So, it is this angel of the Lord figure, which is a pre-incarnate Christ, which is God. And what this really shows us is that, as we said, Jacob's wrestlings with God are his wrestlings seemingly with his faith. All his deception has caught up with Jacob. He's worried about his return home. when he left his brother, wanted to kill him. And he wants to know that God's blessing is there for him. That the covenant of his father's is his. I think this also shows that Jacob gets it now. Jacob gets that this isn't just a man. Because a man couldn't bless him. He asked for a blessing. But if this is just some random guy in the middle of the night wrestling with him, no, I ask him for a blessing. He can't bless me. It's just some guy. But Jacob says, bless me. That's something only the Lord can do.
Notice something here. This is very important theologically. He says, I will not let you go unless you bless me. What is the blessing? The blessing is actually knowing God. That's the blessing. Because he says, I won't let you go until you bless me. So he said, what's your name? He said, Jacob. Then he said, you shall no longer be called Jacob, but God changed his name to Israel. And Jacob said to him, please tell me your name. All the blessing here is knowing God. That's the blessing, not something temporal, not something material, but knowing God himself.
When you say it's the covenant, it's wrapped up in the covenant at least.
Yeah, it's knowing God. Jacob got to know, he knows God.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he blessed him there.
Yeah. And so he's named Israel, right? Like we said.
And you would kind of look at it and you say, wait a minute, how is that a blessing?
Yeah.
And he's got it, because it says in verse 31, he gets up and is limping,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You know, it's just, so most people would look at that and say, well, how is this a blessing? There's no blessing here, but the blessing is knowing God himself. And there's so much, yes, particularly in 1 Peter, remember James, you understand that the blessing is God intervening in your life, and he's going to use trials to create dependence on him. And in verse 31, it says he gets up limping on his thigh. People think, oh, is that a blessing? The guy's hurt. But when you understand knowing God, the way God manifested his love for Jacob, who was the chosen one, is he intervenes in his life. He gets him to the point of complete exhaustion in verse 24. Like, I don't know if you've wrestled, but wrestling somebody's exhausting, let alone going from, evening till dawn for hours. That's beyond exhausting. So he takes Jacob to a point of utter and abject exhaustion, to the point where he says, I give up. I'm not letting go though until you bless me. Blessing is you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's, I've heard it said many times, talking about Jacob's limb. His hip being placed out of socket. It's been said, but I've heard it many times from preachers preaching this text. And it's true. When you have a genuine encounter with God, it's going to change the way you walk.
But Jacob doesn't limp anymore.
Yeah.
So, but he still knows God.
Yeah. That's all I got.